Thank you so much for joining today. Today's session is Fear of Selling, and it is co-led by Chad Horenfeldt. Everybody wave.
Hello.
Chad, hey. All right. So just to jump in real quick, I'll just share that some housekeeping. We've already started putting our LinkedIn URLs and where you are today. If you can also just check out in the chat, there's links for the LinkedIn group, our Slack community. Also super important is the breakout group notes and slides and resources, which is these slides here that we've got here. So we've got, let me just take it away from sharing the slides for a second though, because I personally didn't understand the fear of selling, because when I came into CS, I came into a role where it was part of, like, I was doing sales, account management, I was building up the CS program. So I got trained on all that stuff as soon as I was also creating the post-sales motion, right? That was part of what I did, and, you know, negotiations and all of that. And also, like, I just come from a marketing job, and before that from business school. And it was just part of, like, what I sort of knew how to do. It was just something I'd always been doing. When I read Chad's blog post, to me, it was super helpful. So I just want to share, it's in the resources, but I just want to share so you can see it. This is Chad. Well, come on. There we go. Chad's blog post here, which I love the title, Get Over Yourself, Customer Success, and Own Renewals. But it really is kind of sharing all about sort of like that fear of selling. And it helped me empathize with people who didn't come from my background, which I thought I had done, hadn't done it. And so I love just that we're talking about this topic here today. Chad, was there anything that you wanted to maybe just start off, you know, in terms of your own background and how you sort of came to on this?
Yeah, I mean, if I go back to 2017, and at that point, I was looking for a new customer success leadership opportunity. And I just had thought, what leadership opportunity do I want? And I saw a lot of leadership opportunities where the head of customer success was owning renewals. And I have to be really honest, I was shying away from that a little bit. And really, the main reason was just because it wasn't something that I was doing on a consistent basis, even though back when I was a CSM, I was doing the renewal process, but it just was something that was a little foreign for me. So I realized years later that was really the wrong approach. It was like owning revenue is really important. And I wanted to make sure that other people were aware that, hey, you might have this feeling as well, but you really need to get over that. And you need to embrace owning revenue, because that's really where customer success is going. And if it isn't, if we don't own that revenue, then, and many people have probably seen, like, there's a lot of repercussions there where you become more of a cost center rather than a value add, you know, to your business.
And for me, I had always been thinking about it in terms of in the land and expand model of subscription, you know, that land was pre-sales and post-sales was expand. And in my first role, I did both, but I didn't have a lot of responsibility on the pre-sales because my boss had already done 300 agreements basically with most of the folks in entertainment, because we were an entertainment tech product and everyone had to use us. So he'd been doing like 300 deals the year before and said, what are we going to do afterwards with them? So I was building out the post-sales motion, but getting trained in everything that was pre-sales and post-sales. So to me, I'd always thought about it in terms of what happens, you know, at that you have that signing moment and there's everything that comes up to it and then what happens after it. So I'd always thought of it that way. So anyway, I just felt like it was great to better understand that perspective, and also thought maybe some folks here either had that experience or would want to kind of dig in now and think about it. So really looking forward to everyone's contributions today. Cool. All right, so let me go ahead and get you started. If everybody's ready. All right. So fear of selling. So maybe we can start first with the objections.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So first things first, I think that when many people think of selling, and it's not just necessarily fear of selling, because I think we all sell on a day-to-day basis. We're trying to sell our customers to do a particular solution, or we're trying to even just get them to take a training course. That's all part of selling. I think it's more so in terms of fear of owning revenue, and it's particularly owning retention and owning expansion slash upsell. So some of the first concepts of like fear of that revenue, there's usually a few different parts to it. So it could be that you might feel that it betrays your trust with your customer, because if you're trying to, quote unquote, sell them or renew them, it's, a little foreign, a little maybe icky. It's like, no, it's not my job. I want to focus on driving adoption. I want to understand their outcomes. I don't necessarily want to, quote unquote, sell to them. The other thing that, and this was really on me, I would say, is that I didn't necessarily have the skills. I wasn't really necessarily sure on how to actually run a renewal process, the different parts and setting up playbooks around renewals and upsells. It just wasn't something that was familiar to me. I came from a consulting background, and my job, I was trying to sell business in terms of additional business, but it was more so focused on doing the analysis, understanding requirements, helping develop solutions. It wasn't necessarily going through a full, renewal process and building that out. I think the last one is around, this idea of compensation and job security. So if you're handling revenue, you might have quotas, and there might be some concerns like, well, if I don't hit a certain renewal target or upsell target, then I'm going to get terminated. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that in sales, where sales tends to make more money, but there's a lot of risk that comes along with that. There's that saying you may have heard, you're only as good as your last quarter, or maybe you're only as good as your last sale. And I think the last thing that, in terms of this kind of fear or concern, is around capacity. And what I mean by that is, how much time do you actually have to handle renewals versus handling different other aspects of the CSM role? And I think that's always one of the major challenges of a CSM. It's like they can do onboarding, they can do QBRs, but how much can you actually handle? So those are definitely some of the things that I've seen when it comes to, this fear of owning renewals, owning upsells. Anything you wanted to add, Jan?
Well, I think too, sometimes when you think about it, there's a lot of different types of things that CSMs may do in the post-sales motion. There's onboarding, there's support, there's renewals, there's expansion and upselling, right? And or the movement around like customer education, or even customer marketing, sending out those customer marketing emails. And so when you think about it, depending upon the maturity of your program, or how many customers you have, or if there's complex processes, maybe you're working with procurement and it's like an extracted deal that takes a lot of months, maybe you don't have the bandwidth. Like there's certain points, like at a very early stage of a startup, you might handle support and CS, but then at some point early on, you're going to separate that out. You might still then handle onboarding, right? But at some point you separate that out. In the same sense, most companies, by the time they get to 100 million in revenues, they have a separate renewals team, sometimes much earlier than that, but certainly by that time. If for myself, when we were working on renewals, we had a lot of legal involved from both sides, right? And if that's the case, it was fine for me, because I had a caseload, or a book of business basically, and we had 3 to 5 year deals. So I had only a few renewals going on at any given time, right? but it was also part of our strategy in terms of how we worked with our customers. Actually, I was going to do a poll. I forgot about that. So why don't we do that really quick now, or past, and whoops, roll. Chad, well, I just finished writing this one out because I was going to do it before we got here. Do you want to say anything else about how you've handled it post-sales, and if renewals has, ever been broken out, or if it's been part of the CSM's duties?
Yes, so it's a good point. The other thing that you mentioned in terms of where renewals sit, and if it sits within sales and sits within a renewals team, I think the focus of today's conversation is it's within the CS organization. And one thing to consider as well, if I think back to customer and kind of how we did it there, at customer, the enterprise and strategic segments. So we had 3 segments. We had our SMB segment, we had our enterprise and strategic. So think of like the enterprise as the mid-level. And at the enterprise and strategic level, because there wasn't as many transactions, kind of like what Jan was saying, the CSMs owned renewals as well. But at the SMB level, where we had a lot of transactions, we actually broke out the renewals, and we called them customer account managers. They're essentially account managers, and they were owning what we call the commercial aspects of the renewals and potentially upsells. And then we had a pooled CS team, and we had a digital component there as well. But I think one thing to think about is that not all segments have to be the same in terms of how you actually handle the renewals and handle those areas, going back to the idea of capacity and how much capacity that you have. Another concept that I learned about, and this is something I believe that Heap does, because I talked to Lane over there, and what he mentioned is that it's not that they have these renewal managers, but it's almost like these people who work on operations, and they handle the contractual component in terms of creating the contracts, because that can be really cumbersome as well. And so as CS leaders, one of the things that you need to do is you need to break down the whole process and try and understand what takes time and what do you need to do in order to complete that renewal transaction. And as CSMs and CS professionals, you need to communicate to your leaders what are those things that are a pain in the butt and what are those things that take a long time, so you can either solve that through technology or having specific roles. Because I think, as you were saying, Jan, as a company grows, you need to specialize more, and you need to think about where's the best place to use the specialized talent that you have. Because I could tell you that having a CSM spend 3 hours building an order form is not what you want them to do. You want them to be having, those strategic type conversations. So there's different ways of breaking it down. I've seen obviously sales can own renewals as well, but would tend not to be a proponent of that. And I think that the reason for that, I think it takes away from the revenue ownership that customer success has. And I think B is that it can take away from the experience of the customer as well. I think we've all seen times when, sales comes in and, even if they're just pushing for the renewal, one is it may not be a priority for them. And then 2 is that there can be some, areas that are out of sync between what sales is trying to do and what customer success is trying to do. And then that can really, hinder the overall customer experience.
Yeah, and I would just say too, I saw over in the chat, in terms of the idea of directly selling any products. What I believe strongly in is in the post-sales motion, it's super important that you sell the right product at the right time to the right person. And the reason why I think CSMs are better equipped for doing that than someone else in the organization is because the CSM is more likely the one who understands the organization, what their goals are, and which of the products can actually serve them well. And trust is so critical in any sales process, pre or post. But in that post-sales motion, it really takes that additional knowledge, right? Or else you can really burn that bridge. If a salesperson comes in not understanding because they're not working closely with the customer and tries to upsell them on more capacity than what they need, or the wrong, the products that they don't need, just because they're trying to boost their revenue, for their own pocket because of the way that they're compensated, The problem with that can be is then you burn that relationship. And that's where you get that idea of salesy, right? That's never a nice thing to be called if someone calls you salesy, right? And that's because you feel like you're being sold something that you don't need, or you're not the right person. And why are they talking to me? That sort of thing, right? And so the CSM can actually then broker that conversation better. The thing is really about if they understand negotiations, if they've been trained in it. You want to be sure that you are trained in negotiations if you're handling the negotiation. Sometimes organizations will have somebody else handle the negotiation, whether that's a renewals manager, an account manager, or sometimes it'll pop back over to sales. But if so, the more often you have more people involved in the process, the more you have to be sure you're buttoned up and aligned internally in that way.
Yeah, and just there was a question that John asked. It was kind of, where does sales focus on? And in our organization, sales primarily focuses on new business, but they actually own upsells as well. And so we do have a customer success qualified lead process, and we do have a really good coordination between customer success and sales, which is extremely important. And I think someone commented, that you should have that really good relationship. It doesn't obviously happen all the time. But what we have done is we've created really good alignment on process, and that's really, really helped. Again, like it all depends on the company that you're in and the process that you have. I think what I would say is that I'm fine with sales owning upsells, specifically when the upsells are more complex and they require solution engineering, and they may have a drawn out sales process. A customer, we had a chatbot solution, and it did require a fair amount. There's a trial process. There's a lot involved in terms of getting that customer over the line. And so I was quite fine with that, because going back to capacity, we wanted to focus our customer success on other areas. But ultimately, I wanted to own revenue in some capacity of owning revenue. And, renewals was something that I really wanted to make sure that we owned and did it properly. And, obviously having great metrics to support that. So, again, every organization is different. And the other thing I would caution customer success leaders is, if you're joining a new organization and you want to come in and start, changing things, and, you wanting to own revenue, that could be problematic as well, right? Because, you don't want to start coming in and, changing culture before you understand what the challenges are. And a lot of the times what happens is you get poor results and problems happen. And either you come in and the problems are there, and so you can make a pretty easy case to make changes. But a lot of times things might be going okay. And what I recommend there is, look for what those challenges are, bring the data to support the changes you want to make, and then look to propose those. Don't just propose them for the sake of proposing them because you feel that revenue should be owned under customer success.
Right. Absolutely. If you have a proof of concept before you sign on the dotted line, you're not going to have onboarding post sales because the onboarding already happened. Same idea. Like, make certain that it fits for your organization. So just before I stop sharing the poll, it does look like you've got a 70-30 split, that there's 70% of the folks here have been involved in renewals. At least we didn't ask about expansion and the others. I guess I could have done more polls, but anyway, just something to take a look at. Let's go ahead and just finish sharing a little bit more information before we get to the breakout group. And then, so was there anything else you wanted to say about in terms of the standard approach?
So this is really important and very specific to both customer success leaders and CS pros, is that you really want to make sure that you have certain processes down and there's certain information that you need available in order to own renewals. You can't just be a CSM and your customer success leader says, do this renewal and you need to figure it out and hope for the best. I mean, you're obviously being set up for success, for failure. And I'm sure many people on this call may have been put in those situations, but I'd say the first thing is you really need to know the pricing and understand your pricing. You may have multiple products. You may have, variations on your pricing. So you should have a pricing book of some sort, and you should have access to that. You should know that back and forth so that you're really prepared to talk to that. The second thing is, when it comes to renewals, you should have a standard approach to renewals in terms of what the pricing is. So as an example, one of the things that we did is we actually had a standard increase that we would put in as part of our renewals. So there would be a 5% increase as part of our renewals. For the lower segments where we really focus on doing auto renewals, we would put 5% in automatically for a 1-year renewal. Now, one of the ways that we approach this is if the customer signed for multi-year renewals, we would reduce that percentage increase. And let's say they signed for a 3-year renewal, we would waive that percentage increase, altogether. But the whole point of this is that you need to have a standard approach so that you know what you're doing, you know how these renewals should go, you know what's in your control and what's not in your control and what you can do. And this typically results in playbooks that you have as part of your whole renewal process. When I joined a customer, we had nothing. There was like one email that was being sent to customers for auto renewal. And I was like, okay, let me take that email, and we kind of put it into a Google Doc, and that became the basis of our CS handbook. And that's just a similar way of starting, but you have to start somewhere. And so this standard renewal process, this is just an example, but this is very specific to really detailing out what that process looks like so that you can communicate to your team, and there's a consistent approach that you have. So let's just say, as we talk through this, 6 months before the renewal,
well, if it's an annual renewal in this situation.
That's true. So
yeah,
we're talking about, we're talking about annual renewals here. Obviously it's monthly renewals, much different, but we're talking about annual renewals, and this could be, a very small client, or this could be a really large client. I'd say there's differences in your approach that you take. With the smaller clients, a lot of your communications will be hopefully automated, so that the terms of the renewal and things like that. It's like, hey, your renewal is coming up. But as you can see here, one of the first things that we like to do is we like to be really explicit and ask our customer, hey, like from 0 to 10, what are the chances you're going to renew? With 0 being you're not going to renew, and 10 is for sure you're going to renew. And we do that in a few different ways. We do it as a survey we send out, just a very simple survey. For our enterprise strategic clients, we'll ask them very explicitly, is there anything that's going to be barring you from renewing? And we'll use the same 0 to 10, because the 0 to 10 is really powerful. As an example, let's say the customer gives you a 7 and it's one of your largest customers. That's not good if they're one of your largest customers. And so you want to ask them, like, well, you gave us a 7. Can you provide more clarity? What's something that we're not doing that would enable us to get a higher score? So that can really start a really good conversation, and you're doing this well before your renewal. I know with Customer as a CRM support software, it's a very hard software to rip out. It takes months and months, depending on how large you are. Smaller customers, it's easier. So, if they're going to be replacing us, they're going to need at least 3 months. So starting that renewal process at 3 months is not going to really be very helpful, because they'll have already made their decision. So you need to start it much earlier. The other thing is, depending on the size of the customer, you want to understand what their outcomes are. You want to understand, if there's a success plan in place, and then you want to actually have a renewal forecast in place. And I think for some of these, what we do, as part of the whole process is, we have a meeting with our team, and we have account plans that we've created, and we'll have a firm definition. Do we know what their outcomes are? Do we have a success plan in place? And really what's important there is you're just trying to understand what the level of risk is. Do we know the key contacts there? And, are we set up and on that path? So, that example I provided on the last slide, you want to have something like that in place. The other things, key processes that you want to have in place, you want to have things like objections in place. You want to have a playbook around how you would have a renewal presentation. So if you're putting together a renewal presentation, that should include things like, here's what you have achieved, here's the value that you received from our platform, and you may even have something like what's called like a forward-looking approach to renewals, where you might plug in some data. It's like, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll get this particular result, because we all have seen customers that have been using our platform but not using it as they would expect. And so you want to try and give them kind of what that would look like if they make changes to the input. And I
So,
think the last thing is, oh, sorry, Jan.
yeah, so is that, are you kind of going through the ABCDEs here? Is that what
Yeah,
you're
I think
walking
it's
through?
it's part of it. It's part of
Mhm.
it, but I think that, what's important is just having these types of playbooks established. The last one as part of that renewal presentation is you should be talking about what you rolled out in your product that the customer found valuable and what is coming up in the future. Because a lot of times, if they might be considering an evaluation process, your competitors are kind of breathing, in their ear, like talking in their ear, saying, "Oh, we've got this feature and this feature," and you really have to sell that value and that promise of your product. But in terms of this particular slide, this is a framework that I like to
So,
use. Oh,
just a
sorry,
second, I
Jen.
was just gonna say, I noticed something over in the chat in terms of comment that you were talking about in terms of if a customer says, 7, pretty likely. Part of the reason why, and this is a sales tactic that then you use in a post-sales context, is you get them to verbalize, right? Why they love you or why they don't love you, right? What's the challenge? If you have them verbalize it, not only then are you able to go through and say, okay, and turn it into how do we address this? What sort of outcome are you looking for? Then they have verbalized what the goal is. It's sort of like why you do a success plan in the first place, right? Because if you don't put down like what those actual metrics are that you're working towards, then you kind of forget what was I even trying to do with your product? Why am I happy? Am I happy? It's like asking somebody what they ate for lunch last Tuesday. If it's not written down, they don't know, and neither do you. Right. So that's why you want to verbalize it. That's why you want to document it. That's why you want to do something about it. And like what I would do too is if I was working with the customer and I knew when they were going to renew or what that date was, I wanted to try and get them to expand. And if they weren't ready to expand and use another part of our product or expand how they were using us, then I wanted to try and work on that with them and understand, what their goals were. Because otherwise they are not as engaged with your product and with using you to meet their goals, right? So you always want to try and start working on that in sort of like that 6-month timeline or even earlier, depending upon how long your contracts are. Okay, so just one more minute on the ABCDEs of your framework here, Chad.
Yeah, I think just
Uh-oh.
on this framework slide, I think what's important here is, oh, I'm back. Sorry about that. I think what's important here is that just like everything that I've been talking about, you need consistency, you need process so that everyone's following the same path. And, this ABCD thing, one where it's different from, let's say, other frameworks you may have seen for new deals. This is important because unlike new deals, you usually know what their challenges are. It's not like they have new challenges. Like you want to focus on getting this deal over the line. It's either they're going to renew or they're not going to renew. With an upsell or a new deal, like they might just buy your product or they might not. But here they're already a customer. So first of all, you want to align on what the renewal process is. Who's going to be involved? Is there legal involved? What are the approval processes? Do they understand what the whole renewal process is? So you want to make sure that you get that aligned. You want to make sure that you understand who the champion is, who the decision maker is. And going back to that question, the 0 to 10 chance that you're going to renew, it's really important that you ask something like that, because don't make any assumptions if your customer is going to renew or not, or don't even assume that if you know what their challenges are. Because you may have thought that renewal was a slam dunk, and then all of a sudden there's some sort of person over here that you didn't know about who's a new decision maker that's coming in, and they want to, I don't know, consolidate all sorts of systems, and so you have to have all these ducks in a row. And the last one around value realization, it's critical. Like you need to make sure that you're selling that value back to the customer. And again, you don't have to do this maybe for every renewal, but you really want to make sure that you have alignment here.
Yep. Great. So if everyone's ready, get the link over in the chat. So you have the breakout session notes. Be sure you got that. The questions we're going to be discussing in the breakout rooms. Where does renewals and expansions sit in your organization today? What are the pros and cons of your current structure? And what would you need to do to improve your renewals and expansion process? Sound good? And I'm going to go ahead and set up the breakout rooms now. You ready? All right, how'd it go? How's everybody doing here?
Good. Great.
Did you solve all the world problems? Did that?
Oh, of course.
We did. I think we
We're all
need
going to
more.
start talking about renewals during onboarding. So every conversation thereafter is hopefully much easier.
Renewals are products problem.
No, well, that's true, right? Well, but it is in a way, right? Like if people
is.
aren't happy with the product, then, you know, there are things you have to fix in the product, right? You know,
Like
or
a company-wide effort.
Yes,
It
renewal is
is.
everyone's problem.
it is actually.
It is. Well, and I think too that certain teams take on more different responsibility for it, depending on the maturity of your product.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So in some cases, it might be really product's problem, or issue, but in others, it might be that the support team is the leader right now, because that's where the biggest pain points actually hit.
Yeah.
Or it's, you know, so I think that depending on the maturity of the organization, you know, one part of the team's setup is going to be the leader in managing the pain to get people to renew, right?
Right.
And
I
Yeah.
was going to chime in. One thing that
Yeah.
that was really interesting in our conversations, and I'm curious if other people have had this as well, is that we were talking about the pros and cons of where renewals sit. And one of the cons is that if sales owns it, is their compensation. And a lot of times sales are compensated differently for new deals versus renewals. So I'm curious if that's come up with anybody else, and I'm also curious if people may not know, you know, how sales are comped. I'm just curious if that came up at all.
Did that come up for anybody else?
We
No?
didn't talk about the
Yeah.
compensation part.
it kind
Yeah.
of started to come up, I think, in our group, and then we got called back to the. We were roped in.
Yeah.
We got
yeah.
to talk about it.
We talked a little bit about incentives with renewal, but I think that's a great point, Chad. A lot of folks I've worked with were just completely unfamiliar with the function of our sales comp process and how that motivated the time they spent with existing customers.
I personally have seen where it can contribute to a lack of alignment, or it can contribute towards alignment, right? That if sales is handling the papering and the commercial aspects, the negotiations, and there's been times when they haven't been compensated, you know, to focus on post sales, and people have lost renewals because of it, right? And so there can be, you know, problems created with if you don't have them compensated properly. That's also a reason why sometimes it doesn't go back over to sales, right? Because they aren't able to effectively change how they're compensated. So Bowden, what's your comment on that?
Just some credit to Tim Galuli, who, when we started talking about how much we all value CSQLs, so CS qualified leads,
Mhm.
Tim said something that I firmly agree with, that yes, if you're going to create a requirement for CS to be perceived as successful by creating CS qualified leads, then surely we should get a cut of the comp.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it, right? Is if you're contributing to success, you want to try and have some compensation in there. It also incentivizes CSMs to pay attention to those types of things as well. Yeah, compensation all the way across. Jim, were you going to add something to that?
Bowden hit it nail on the head. If we're nurturing some of the accounts and we're earning their trust with the clients, after say 9 months, we're asking them to be a referral. They end up being a referral to a prospect. That prospect signs. I think there's a lot of talk and focus around that in the future. of, that's our job at the end of the day, but how much is enough? If we consistently do that, is there a way to look at compensation for CSMs in that area? Because at the end of the day, we're helping with a new sale. We're actually selling again. We're selling them the value to stay with us and not leave us.
Well, I think with that, then when you have compensation, I see a lot of teams where it's like 80-20, 80% base pay, 20% variable pay, then you want to ensure that you're holding them accountable for what the process is, training them in what the process is, having, some parameters so that they understand what they can go in and offer or not offer, whether they're negotiating it in the end, or if they're handing it off to a CSQL, what does good look like when you're doing something like that, right? And giving that sort of additional support.
Mhm.
Right.
As a CS leader, what I've done there to start things off on, let's say, a referral program or the CS qualified leads, is I put a spiff in place, which is kind of like a temporary incentive. And usually I do in a few ways. Like let's say you get, I don't know, let's say 10 SQLs, you might get X amount more. You might get X amount per CSQL, so you make it like $100 or something like that. And if a CSQL closes, then maybe you get $1,000. And there's like little perks. Like if you're the first one to get a deal closed, then you get like an extra perk. And then
Exactly.
if your team, sorry,
Exactly. No, you're 100%. And you got to be careful about it because it changes the behavior.
Right.
So our CSMs
Right.
be 98% focused on those spiffs and then not nurturing the account and their health. So it's a pretty
Right.
delicate topic, but one that's very open
Yeah.
to hotly debated. So, but you nailed it right there, Chad. Like spiff, something to motivate the CSMs.
Well, and when you do things like competitions and things like that, what sort of things are you doing competitions around, right? Are you doing competitions around, things that help gain adoption of the product? Are you doing competitions around things that will, lead towards those other activities and outcomes that you want, and also as a CS leader, then you also want to take a look at what are your weak points? What stage are you at? Have you ever done, QBRs or, executive business reviews? If, do you get the executives at those reviews? If you're doing that, once or twice a year, with the executives, are they multi-threaded? Is that part of what you want to encourage them to do? Is that going to help lead you towards being able to get those expansions and renewals more successfully? Sorry, there's a lot of things over in the chat. Is there somebody who's contributed in the chat who wants to say it out loud?
Yeah, I just posted something. I'm happy to say it out loud.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about when a new CS leader comes in, how do they evaluate the current makeup of the team, the CS team, their appetite to own renewals, and this existing skill set in the team? I'm just speaking from past experience. How do leaders come in and do that right and make sure that the legacy team feels like they want to continue to be part of this new structure?
Is that a question, or did you have some thoughts on it?
It's a question.
Sure. Well, I'm sure Chad will have some thoughts on it. But I know for myself, what I've done is just started to ask questions and said, okay, show me your accounts and when are they renewing, and who have you reached out to? What do you have planned? And just start asking them about the strategy that they have and see if it's a consistent strategy across their book of business. And then when you're talking to each of your reports, asking similar questions to see, are they doing it in a similar way? And then setting up opportunities for them to exchange ideas, and then and what has worked well, and then trying to help them sort of more organically build some playbooks around it, so that then they feel like it's not being put upon them, and then eventually building those playbooks so that then they're all in agreement on when is best practice to reach out and how to build those strategies. That's usually what I've tried to do. you know, while juggling 10,000 other balls, right? So Chad, what you're nodding your head, what other thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, I think the other thing too is that you need to be in close contact with your revenue leaders or your leader and trying to understand what their priorities are. You know, maybe their priorities are focusing on new business, or maybe there's a new product that you're launching or something to that effect. And so that, you know, you come at it from an alignment partnership perspective and not necessarily saying, you know, that, hey, like I want to take this on. In the best situations, it's been that sales wants to prioritize over here, and they're more than happy to give that to you because, you know, they don't want their sales team focusing on renewals. So again, it's just all about the situation. You know, you may have a new product that's coming into play, and or maybe there's a key segment that, you know, that sales wants to own. It's usually at the higher end where they want to own all of that renewal process, and you're like, you know what, you hold on to that. I'm going to handle this process over here. I'm going to automate, let's say, our SMB and just auto renew that and leverage ops. So you just have to look at every situation, understand where the priority is, understand, you know, what your counterparts in sales, what their priorities are, and then develop your strategy and what your approach should be. Because you know, you can't do everything. You have to just determine what's the best and most important item to focus on.
And I would just add to that if you are going to make a change, then it needs to be based upon, you know, there's some sort of friction, there's some sort of problem that you're solving for. Change for change's sake, why do that? If you're improving something, and that's why I think we wanted to have one of those questions in there as to what would you like to do to improve your current process, right? Are there pain points that you need to solve for? And, you know, sometimes it's just the sales to CS handoff. And other times it's, you know, renewals process. It could vary what you need to solve for and what pain points you have.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Good. No, thanks, Sean. What were you going to say?
I'll make a quick point. I think it's also important to consider the timeline, because too many times I've seen these changes try to be implemented, you know, for the most part overnight. Let's call that, you know, what it is. And, you know, what I've tried to do, especially when there's changes that are impacting a team that may not have all the desired skill sets, or there's resource constraints, or whatever the reason is establish a timeline that makes sense, whether that's a couple of quarters that you make this change over, or a couple of months. And the first, you know, month or first quarter, you're collecting data and really, you know, leaning into a lead by example format where, you know, maybe you as a CS leader in an early stage company, you start demonstrating how to actually, you know, set this playbook in motion, or that maybe there are a couple of CSMs on the team who come from a bit more of a sales background, and you pilot with them, establish metrics with them, and everyone can really see how that operates. And then the second quarter, or maybe the second month, you start to roll it out to the rest of the team, and then ultimately, you know, start to, you know, motivate the team to move in that direction by incentivizing them properly with, you know, part of their performance compensation.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. No, I was just going to ask if anybody else had any other thoughts. So we're at our time. We're just a couple of minutes over. Happy to take any additional comments before we close up though today. Really appreciated all the insights we got in the chat and from the conversation. Any other closing thoughts we have from folks or questions? You have a burning question.
My environment is we're self-service, and the renewal process is self-service, and there is no sales people other than the CEO in a sense. The thing I worry about is when there's competition. Right now, in a sense, we don't tend to think about competition on a daily basis, and you know, we have enterprise customers. So I tend to think at some point having a more active renewal process will be effective for helping make the company more competitive. That's just an observation right now. I'm not sure what to do with it yet.
Well, certainly, if you're looking at a self-service process for both sales and renewals, then obviously, you know, like product needs to be very involved, and you also need to have marketing very involved and thinking about that overall customer experience. And then you really want to look at measuring any place where the transition isn't successful. right? Like if they're coming and looking at things or trying things out, but they're not transitioning into a paid customer, or how many folks are dropping off, and at what point do they drop off, at whether it's usage or, whatever you can see in terms of where that drop off is, so that then they're not renewing. But that requires them working very closely with product and with marketing, and trying to also identify who your ideal customer profile is that is staying, how they're using your product successfully. A lot of times that you're kind of looking at the telemetry, where you're looking at the data that you have, right? And if you don't have that, then you're trying to either build up your capabilities around that, and also doing surveying, or if anybody will get on, and actually speak to you, trying to get insights that way. So yeah, self-service has its own challenges, but we can learn a lot from that product-led growth motion and how we apply it when there are people involved. And so it's a great exercise to be able to do that. Well, it might be challenging, but there's a lot you can learn from that. Awesome. Chad, thank you so much for, writing the article that inspired this, and for coming in and sharing today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. This is not an easy topic, and if you would like to reach out and chat more, if you have more questions, just feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Great to have you here today.
Thanks,
See you
Chad. Thanks,
soon.
Jen.
All right. Bye.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.